A little girl, barely 6 years old, shivered on the cold wooden floor. Her torn pink dress clung to her like a fragile memory of innocence, smeared with dust and fear. In her trembling arms, she cradled her baby brother, pressing his tiny head against her chest as if her heartbeat could shield him from the world. Tears traced down her cheeks, and with a cracked whisper she pleaded, "Don't hurt us." Before the echo of her words could fade, the door slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. Sergeant Travis Morgan had returned earlier than anyone dared expect. His broad frame filled the doorway, his steel-gray eyes scanning the scene like a storm ready to break. And he was not alone. At his side stood Atlas, a German shepherd whose presence was as commanding as any soldier's, muscles coiled beneath his black and tan coat, ears rigid, amber eyes alive with a silent promise. No harm would touch these children. But what came next was not the joyful homecoming the children had imagined. It was chaos, raw and unflinching. The house itself seemed to tremble as truth and betrayal collided, leaving scars deeper than broken walls. Because that night, the little girl's tears would witness more than her father's return. She would witness a choice, one that would decide whether love could truly triumph over shadows. And as Atlas growled low in his throat, sensing danger no one else yet saw, a final question hung in the air. Was Travis returning as their savior, or as the storm that would tear their fragile world apart? Stay with me until the end, because this story will show you how courage can fracture a lie, how love can defy betrayal, and how one moment can change everything. He wanted him to be a guardian for his children. The house came into view, a modest 2-story home with white siding and a front porch that Grace once filled with flowers. For a moment, Travis stopped on the path, clutching the strap of his duffel bag. His chest tightened as memories surged. Grace standing there, slim and graceful, her long auburn hair flowing in the breeze. She had been of medium height, slender frame, and soft green eyes that always carried laughter. Grace was warmth embodied. Her passing in childbirth had left the home hollow, the children in the care of others, and Travis adrift in grief. He drew in a deep breath, rubbing a callous thumb against his palm. "We're home, boy," he murmured to Atlas, who tilted his head, sensing the tension beneath his master's palm. He walked up the steps, boots creaking on the porch, and unlocked the front door. The moment it swung open, silence pressed down on him. No laughter, no chatter of children, only the faint ticking of the wall clock. He set down his bag, calling softly, "Lee, Caleb." Then he froze. From deeper in the house came the sound, a child's muffled sob, followed by a trembling plea. "Please don't hurt us." The words cleaved through him. His heart pounded as his hand instinctively reached for the sidearm that was no longer there. Atlas bristled, ears pricked forward, tail stiff. Travis strode down the minor and hallway, his boots striking the hardwood floor, each step heavier than the last. He reached the living room doorway and stopped dead in his tracks. On the floor, his daughter Lily Morgan, just 6 years old, sat crumpled against the wall. Her small frame was wrapped around baby Caleb, who was barely 1. Lily had inherited Grace's soft brown hair, though now it hung in tangled strands around her face. Her pink dress, once bright, was torn and smeared with dirt. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her small arms trembling as she clutched her brother. Caleb's face was flushed red from crying, his tiny fist clawing at his sister's sleeve for comfort. Towering above them was Brooke Larkin, Travis's second wife. She was in her early 32nd, tall and striking, with blonde hair styled in careful waves and a slim figure wrapped in a fitted red dress. At first glance, she could be mistaken for a model or socialite, but her expression now was twisted in irritation. Heavy makeup masked her features, but not the sharpness of her glare. Brooke had once seemed like salvation when she entered their lives after Grace's death. Gentle, poised, offering care for 2 children who desperately needed a mother. To Travis, grief-blinded, she had been a bomb. But what he saw now made his blood run cold. "Shut up!" Brooke snapped, her voice like shards of glass. "How many times have I told you? Stop whining or you'll both be out on the street." Atlas growled, a deep rumble that shook the floorboards. He stepped forward, positioning his body between Brooke and the children, hackles raised. His amber eyes blazed with warning. "Enough!" Travis's voice thundered, horsaro with fury. He surged forward, dropping to his knees beside Lily. She shrank back for a moment, uncertain, but then recognized him. Her sobs broke anew, and she pressed her face into his chest. Travis carefully gathered Caleb into his arms, clumsy from months apart, but desperate to hold him. The boy squirmed and wailed until Travis rocked him gently, whispering, "Daddy's here. You're safe." Brooke's eyes widened, venom flashing for just an instant before she smoothed it into a saccharine smile. She reached a manicured hand toward Travis's sleeve. "You're back early. I was only disciplining them. You know how wild children can be." Her tone dripped with honey, but her eyes flicked sharply toward Lily, silencing the girl with a single look. Travis rose slowly, Caleb still cradled in one arm, Lily clinging to his leg. His jaw tightened. Atlas moved closer, head low, teeth bared at the faintest movement from Brooke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truth. Travis's voice was low but firm. "Don't raise your voice at my children again." Brooke laughed softly, as if brushing off his words. "Travis, darling, you've been gone so long. You don't understand what it takes to manage this house, to raise 2 children without a mother. I've done everything for them while you buried yourself in duty. Don't mistake their little tantrums for abuse." But Lily's grip on her father's leg only tightened, and her eyes wide, fearful, pleading told another story. Travis felt his stomach churn. For months he had convinced himself Brooke was the caretaker his children needed. He had believed her kind gestures, her quiet reassurances. Yet here was the truth unveiled in the precipice. Hollow of his living room, his daughter terrified, his son crying, and Atlas, ever loyal, standing guard against the very woman he had trusted. He adjusted Caleb against his shoulder and crouched to meet Lily's eyes. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now. Nobody's going to hurt you." Atlas nudged Lily gently with his nose, a soft whine escaping his throat. The little girl reached out, burying her hand in the thick fur around his neck, finding the comfort she had been denied. Brooke stepped closer, her voice silky again. "Please, Travis, don't blow this out of proportion. You're tired from travel. Sit, eat, and you'll see. Children exaggerate." Travis straightened, towering over her, his face a mask of restrained fury. His years in the ROPS and military had taught him to act under fire, to hold back until the moment was right. But inside, his heart broke with each sob from Lily, with each trembling breath from Caleb. He turned away from Brooke without a word, guiding Lily toward the couch and setting Caleb gently in her lap. Atlas settled beside them, his body a solid wall of protection. Brooke's smile faltered, the cracks in her facade widening. She opened her mouth to protest, but Travis cut her off with a single searing look. For the first time since he had met her, she looked away, and in that moment, Travis knew whatever illusion he had lived in was shattered. This was no homecoming of peace. This was the beginning of a battle he had not expected, but one he would fight with every breath to protect his children. The dining room of the Morgan house looked warm at first glance. A polished oak table stretched under the amber glow of a chandelier. Plates gleamed, cutlery neatly arranged, but beneath the surface, calm, an invisible current of tension moved through the air, heavy and bitter. Travis Morgan sat at the head of the table, still in his fatigue jacket, his broad shoulders squared yet stiff. His steel gray eyes scanned everything with the quiet vigilance of a soldier still on alert. He had fought in dusty deserts, seen comrades fall, and endured months of separation, but nothing unsettled him like the trembling of his own child sitting across from him. Beside him, Atlas lay quietly at first, his black and tan coat shimmering under the light. At 6 years old, Atlas had the alertness of a sentry. His amber eyes never strayed far from Lily and Caleb. Every flick of his ears signaled he heard more than any human could. At the far side of the table sat Lily, only 6, her small figure dwarfed by the high back chair. She wore the same faded pink dress from earlier, its hem frayed. Her soft brown hair, which once bounced with life, now clung limply around her pale face. She lifted her spoon with trembling hands, shoulders hunched, as though bracing for a strike that might come at any moment. At Lily's side, in a high chair, sat Caleb, just 1 year old. His cheeks were rosy from earlier, crying fits, and his wide hazel eyes darted nervously. His small fists tapped restlessly against the tray, demanding comfort he could not yet articulate. Brooke Larkin, Travis's second wife, presided over the meal with practiced poise. She had dressed deliberately for the occasion in a sleek crimson blouse that accentuated her figure. Her blonde hair curled over her shoulders like threads of gold, and her lips were painted a shade too dark, almost predatory. To an outsider, she would appear the perfect hostess, but to Travis, the mask was cracking. Her gestures were sharp, her smile fixed, and her blue eyes carried flashes of irritation whenever the children shifted in their seats. As Brooke leaned forward to place a piece of meat into Lily's bowl, Travis noticed the subtle flinch in his daughter's shoulders. His gaze sharpened. Beneath the sleeve of her dress, just where the wrist met the forearm, he saw the faint outline of a bruised purple fading into yellow. Old enough to tell a story, recent enough to sting. "Eat, sweetheart," Brooke cooped, her tone sweetened with honey, but her hand lingered on Lily's arm just a moment too long, pressing down as though testing obedience. Lily's spoon clattered softly against the bowl. She did not look up, did not protest. Her small shoulders simply curled tighter. Travis's jaw clenched. He forced his expression neutral, but inside, his chest burned. His military discipline screamed at him to stay measured, observe, and gather the whole picture before acting. Yet his instincts as a father urged him to tear Brooke's hand away and demand answers. A sudden cry broke the moment. Caleb kicked his legs, his mouth open, wide in a wail. Brooke rose smoothly, lifting the baby into her arms. Her grip, however, was far from gentle. Her manicured fingers wrapped too tightly under his armpits, forcing another sharp cry from the child. Atlas winded low, ears pinned back, his amber eyes locked on Brooke, and his tail stiffened like a rod. Travis stood quickly. "Give him to me." His voice was controlled. He reached out, and for the first time in months, Caleb was in his father's arms. At first awkward, Travis shifted until the boy's tiny head rested against his shoulder. Caleb whimpered, then softened into short sobs, his fists curling into his father's jacket. Travis kissed the crown of his son's head, whispering in a voice no one else could hear, "You're safe. Daddy's here." He sat back down slowly, rocking Caleb. His eyes fell, once more on Lily, who had been watching him with a mixture of disbelief and fragile hope. The spoon trembled in her hand, as though she were rediscovering what it meant to have someone in her corner. Brooke seated herself again, forcing a thin smile. "He's fussy when he's tired. It happens. Don't take it so seriously, Travis." But Atlas would not settle. The German Shepherd sat upright, nose twitching, head swinging toward the baby's bottle on the table. He nudged Travis's elbow, then sniffed the bottle, again, letting out a quiet, insistent bark. Travis frowned, picking up the bottle. The liquid inside was pale, almost translucent. Suspicion tightened his stomach. On impulse, he dabbed a drop on his finger and tasted it. His eyes narrowed instantly. It was milk, yes, but so watered down, it carried almost no nourishment. His gaze cut to Brooke, who looked back with exaggerated innocence. "Formula is expensive," she said lightly. "I stretch it out a little." "He's fine." Travis's voice dropped to a growl. "You don't starve a child to save $1. The silence around the table grew deafening. Lily bent her head lower. Caleb whimpered softly in. Travis's arms and Atlas's steady growl filled the space with unspoken accusation. Dinner passed in stiff silence. After that, Brooke spoke occasionally, trying to fill the void with chatter about groceries, neighbors, or errands, but her words barely touched the air before evaporating. Travis answered little. He was watching Lily's every flinch, watching Caleb's weary eyes, and most of all, watching the shadowed expressions that crossed Brooke's face when she thought no one noticed. When the dishes were cleared, Travis carried Caleb upstairs and tucked him into the crib. He helped Lily wash her hands and led her to bed. Atlas lay down across the doorway of the children's room like a sentry. Only when both children finally drifted into an uneasy sleep did Travis step back into the hall. A soft voice stopped him. "Mr. Morgan." It was Mrs. Whitaker, the elderly housekeeper. She had been with the family since Grace's wedding day. In her 62nd, with silver hair pulled back in a tidy bun and hands roughened by decades of work, she moved quietly through the house, always respectful of boundaries. Tonight, however, her pale blue eyes carried a storm. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, glancing down the hallway to ensure Brooke was nowhere near. Travis gestured, and her into the dimly lit kitchen. The air smelled faintly of soap and old wood. Mrs. Whitaker twisted a cloth in her hands, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Since your wife passed, things have not been right, Miss Brooke. She makes Lily stand outside in the cold if she spills a spoon. One night, I found them, Lily and the baby sleeping in the storage closet because the bedroom was locked. She said it was punishment." Travis felt his hands curl into fists on the table. "Locked with the baby?" Mrs. Whitaker nodded sadly. She also tells Lily that if she ever tells you, she'll throw both children out. That's why the girl stays silent. His breath came shallow, rage, and guilt twisted in his gut, all the months away, telling himself his children were safe. Yet this was the truth. Atlas, who had padded into the kitchen behind them, suddenly stiffened. The dog trotted to the hallway, nose for the floor, then returned, nudging Travis insistently. He barked once, short and sharp, then padded toward the cleaning closet. Confused, Travis followed. He opened the door, the hinges creaking. Inside, beneath the broom and mop, Atlas's paw scratched against a shoe box. Travis pulled it out. Inside lay a ring of keys, one of them clearly to the children's bedroom, and a small device no bigger than a pager. Travis lifted it and realized with a jolt it was an audio transmitter. Brooke had been listening in, controlling, monitoring. Travis sank against the wall, the device cold in his hand. His heart thundered. Evidence proof that his children lived under a fied regime of fear, even under surveillance. He looked down at Atlas, who sat silently now, tail thumping once as if to say, "You needed to see this." Travis exhaled slowly, his throat raw. The soldier in him recognized a battlefield when he saw one, and this house had become one. Sleep would not come to Travis that night. He lay in the below, darkened room, listening to the steady breathing of his children just down the hall. Lily and Caleb had finally drifted into slumber, their small frames curled beneath the blankets. Atlas lay across the doorway of the nursery, his massive body forming a silent barrier between innocence and threat. Every so often, Travis could hear a low rumble in the dog's chest, as if even in rest, he remained on watch. Travis sat at his desk in the dim glow of a lamp, a pen tapping against the grain of the wood. His mind replayed the dinner table, the bruises, the watered-down milk, and the confession from Mrs. Whitaker. He had stared at death on the battlefield, but never had he felt fear cut so deep. Out there, he had a weapon, a unit, and a mission. Here, all he had were two frightened children. An annoying question. How much had he missed? Atlas stirred suddenly, his ears flicked, head rising. The dog sniffed the air, muscles rippling as he pushed himself to his feet. A faint growl vibrated through the floor. "What is it, boy?" Travis whispered, standing. Atlas padded toward the back of the house, nose low to the ground. Travis followed in silence, his soldier's instinct snapping awake. The dog led him to the rear door, where a draft carried something sharp and unmistakable, the cloying scent of perfume. Brooke's perfume. Travis peered through the glass panes. Outside, under the weak moonlight, a shadow moved along the stone path toward the garden. Brooke's silhouette was easy to recognize, tall, slender, her blonde hair catching the faintest shimmer. But she wasn't alone. Another figure emerged from the side gate. The man was in his mid-32nd, wearing a dark overcoat and carrying a slim leather satchel. His posture was erect, confident, the way someone accustomed to business conducted themselves. Even at a distance, Travis noted his neatly cropped black hair, clean-shaven face, and angular jaw. His eyes glinted behind thin spectacles, surveying the yard with quick, sharp glances. This was no casual visitor. This was someone with purpose. Brooke met him near the old oak tree. Her voice, lowered, drifted back through the still air. "You're late, Caleb." So, this was Caleb Turner. Travis recognized the name from Whispers in Town, a local broker, who dabbled not only in legitimate investments, but also in more dubious schemes. He had the reputation of being charming at the bar, but ruthless in business, known for pushing desperate widows into risky deals. "I only have a few minutes," Caleb replied, his voice clipped. "Did you bring the authorization papers?" Brooke reached into her clutch and pulled out a thin packet. She looked over her shoulder nervously before shoving it into his hands. "It's for the Walker Family Trust. Once the proxy is signed, the control shifts. I can't wait forever." Travis felt his blood run cold. The trust had been Grace's legacy, meant to safeguard Lily and Caleb's future. Brooke wasn't simply cruel. She was planning to strip his children of their inheritance. Caleb flipped through the pages quickly, his thin fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "The marriage certificate is enough to prove spousal rights, but without your husband's signature, the transfer won't stand. You need leverage." He closed the file with a snap. "Pressure him or wait until he slips." Brooke's voice hardened, all the sweetness gone. "He won't suspect a thing. He's too busy." playing soldier father. Just be ready when I call. Travis's fists clenched at his sides. Atlas shifted, growling low, the ridge of fur along his spine, standing tall. Travis placed a steadying hand on the dog's neck, signaling patience. The soldier in him knew he needed more than outrage. He needed proof. Silently, he reached into his pocket and thumbed the small recorder he carried, an old habit from deployments where intelligence was survival. He clicked it on, the red, light concealed by his palm. Every poisonous word spilled in the garden was captured. The meeting ended quickly. Caleb tucked the papers into his satchel, shook Brooke's hand with a brief squeeze, and slipped back through the side gate. Brooke lingered only a moment, adjusting her hair in the moonlight, then returned inside, her heels clicking softly across the patio stones. Travis remained frozen at the window, breath steady, recorder clenched, and in his fist. Beside him, Atlas pressed close, amber eyes still locked on the fading trail. "Good work, boy," Travis murmured, his voice thick. The dog nuzzled his leg once, as though affirming their shared mission. Travis waited until the house fell silent again. Then he returned to the nursery. Lily stirred in her sleep, whimpering softly. Atlas curled at her bedside, resting his chin on the mattress, and the girl's breathing eased. Caleb then shifted in his crib, tiny fingers grasping at nothing until Travis laid a hand gently on his back. He stood there, watching his children, and the decision settled in his bones like steel. By dawn, Travis had already showered, shaved, and brewed a pot of coffee. The sleepless night left shadows under his eyes, but his resolve was sharper than any blade. He sat at the kitchen table with the recorder in front of him, the evidence staring back. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. The line clicked, and a deep voice answered. Avery Grant. Avery had once served as a JA officer during the war. Now, in his early 42nd, he was a family attorney in Denver. He was a tall man with sandy blonde hair beginning to gray at the temples, a strong jaw framed by a neatly trimmed beard and eyes the color of slate. His reputation was formidable, a man who spoke with calm precision in court, yet carried the iron will of a soldier who had seen both battlefields and courtrooms. Travis always respected Avery's sharp mind and unwavering sense of justice. "It's Travis Morgan," he said quietly. Pause, then warmth. "Travis, been a long time. What's going on?" "I need your help," Travis admitted. His voice dropped to a whisper, glancing down the hall to ensure Brooke remained asleep. "It's about my kids. I have evidence abuse and something bigger. She's trying to take the trust Grace left behind." Avery's tone shifted instantly. "All business. Do you have proof?" I recorded. "Everything. Last night, she met with Caleb Turner. They're planning to transfer control." "Good," Avery said. "Hold on to it. Don't confront her yet. The first step is filing for an emergency protective order that will keep the children safe while we build the rest of the case. I'll drive down to Summit Springs tomorrow morning. In the meantime, document everything. Every bruise, every word, every look. Don't let her suspect, you know." Travis rubbed his temple, exhaustion catching up. "Understood. And Travis," Avery added, his voice firm but kind. "You're not alone in this. We'll fight for them." When the call ended, Travis exhaled slowly. He reached down, scratching behind Atlas's ear. The dog leaned into his touch, tail thumping softly. "From now on, we don't let her near them without one of us watching." "Not for a second," Travis whispered. Atlas responded with a low bark, as if swearing allegiance. As the morning light spilled into the house, Brooke descended the stairs in a silk robe, her smile painted back on as though the night had never happened. "You're up early," she said casually. Travis forced a neutral expression. "Just catching up on paperwork." He slipped the recorder into his pocket, its weight both a burden and a weapon. Brooke poured herself coffee, humming a tune. She glanced at him over the rim of her cup, suspicion flickering briefly. But Travis's face revealed nothing. Inside, however, his resolve burned bright. The war was no longer across the ocean. It was here in his home, and this time he would not fail his children. The courthouse in Summit County stood like an austere sentinel in the crisp Colorado morning. Its red brick facade and arched windows looked sturdy, immovable, the kind of building meant to project the weight of law and the permanence of justice. Inside, however, emotions churned like storm winds. Travis Morgan entered through the heavy doors with his children. He had exchanged his fatigues for a clean, charcoal gray suit. Though his soldier's posture was unmistakable, broad shoulders squared, jaw tight, his steel Gray eyes betrayed both sleeplessness and fierce determination. At his side walked Atlas, the German shepherd, a model of quiet power. Atlas's black and tan coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his ears pricked forward, his gait steady. Every glance from the people around them seemed to soften when they saw the dog's amber eyes watching with loyalty. Beside Travis clung Lily, 6 years old, in a pale blue dress that brushed her knees. Her hair, brown and soft, had been brushed that morning by Mrs. Whitaker, tied back with a ribbon, yet strands still fell to frame her small face. Her wide eyes darted nervously around the hall. She reached out instinctively, fingers tangling into Atlas's thick fur. The dog stood still, steady as a pillar, and she drew comfort from the warmth beneath her hand. In Travis's other arm, he carried Caleb, barely 1 year old, dressed in a simple cream sweater. The boy's cheeks were plump, but his expression was solemn for one so young. They moved through the hushed corridor until they reached the assigned courtroom. There, already waiting, was Avery Grant, Travis's attorney and old friend. Avery stood tall, early 42nd, his sandy blonde hair just beginning to silver at the temples. A neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jawline, and his slate-colored eyes were calm yet penetrating. Avery wore a tailored navy suit that emphasized his professional authority. But more than his appearance, it was the aura of quiet confidence that anchored Travis. Avery clasped Travis's shoulder firmly. "You're not alone," he said. Travis nodded, voice low. "Let's finish this." Inside, the room was arranged with deliberate symmetry. Dark wooden benches, the elevated bench for the judge, the seal of Colorado mounted above. To one side sat Brooke Larkin, dressed in a cream skirt suit and pearl earrings, her blonde hair styled in perfect waves, her blue eyes brimmed with carefully cultivated tears, and a tissue was pressed delicately to her cheek. She leaned toward her attorney. Alan Pierce, a sharp-featured man in his 42nd with slicked black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a smooth baritone voice. Known for his aggressive cross-examinations, Pierce had built his reputation defending wealthy clients with more ambition than morality. The bailiff's call echoed, "All rise." From the doorway stepped Judge Elaine Porter, a woman of 52. She was tall and slender, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back into a non-nonsense bun. Her face bore fine lines at the eyes and mouth, yet her expression was anything but weary. Her hazel eyes were bright, observant, the kind that missed nothing. Her voice carried authority, sharpened by decades on the bench. "Be seated." The proceedings began with Avery rising. "Your Honor, we are here to petition for an emergency protective order on behalf of the children, Lily Morgan and Caleb Morgan. We submit testimony and photographic evidence documenting neglect and emotional abuse under the care of their stepmother, Brooke Larkin." Alan Pierce rose smoothly, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted stepmother. These accusations are exaggerated, born of resentment and grief. Discipline is not abuse." Judge Porter lifted a hand. "We'll hear testimony," Avery gestured. "The court calls Mrs. Whitaker." From the back, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker rose. She was in her early 62nd with silver hair tied back neatly, wearing a simple gray cardigan. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the stand, but her blue eyes carried quiet resolve. She had served the Morgan household since the days of grace, and the lines on her face were carved by both work and loyalty. "Please state your relationship to the family," Avery prompted. "I have worked as a housekeeper since Grace Morgan married Mr. Travis," she said, her voice gentle but steady. "And what have you witnessed?" Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I saw Lily forced to stand outside on the porch in the cold, sometimes for hours, because she dropped a spoon or spilled milk. One night, I found her and the baby locked out of their bedroom. They slept in the storage closet. I've seen the baby given only diluted milk. I tried to intervene, but Miss Brookie told me I had no right." The courtroom shifted in uneasy silence. Travis felt his jaw tighten. His knuckles widened where they rested on the table. Atlas let out a low whine, sensing his master's tension. Alan Pierce rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Whitaker, you are 62, correct?" "Yes. Is it possible your memory plays tricks in a dimly lit hallway? That you mistook someone else's voice for my client's?" Mrs. Whitaker's chin lifted. "Number Y. I worked in that house for 10 years. I do not mistake voices. Do you harbor personal resentment toward my client?" Her answer was firm. "Number, why only fear for the children?" Avery introduced photographs, Close-ups of Lily's wrist, faint bruises still visible. Judge Porter examined them, her brow tightening. Alan tried again. Children bruise themselves often at play. These photos do not prove causation, but the judge's eyes lingered on the photographs, then on Lily, seated quietly beside Travis. The tension in the room thickened when Avery finally rose. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we would ask Lily Morgan if she wishes to speak. Travis's heart clenched. He looked at his daughter, so small in her blue dress, fingers twisted in Atlas's fur. She looked up at him with eyes both frightened and searching. You don't have to, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm here. But after a moment, Lily nodded. She released Atlas reluctantly, her little hand slipping into the baifs as she was guided to the witness stand. She climbed onto the seat, her feet dangling above the floor. The clerk asked her name. My name is Lily Morgan, she said softly. 6 years old. Judge Porter leaned forward, voice gentle. Lily, all you need to do is tell the truth. Do you understand? Lily nodded. She clasped her hands together tightly, then raised her eyes, no longer to her father, but straight ahead. Her small voice trembled, yet carried clearly through the chamber. She said, if I ever told Daddy, she would throw me and my brother out on the street. But I don't want my brother to grow up in fear. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air seemed to pause. Travis covered his mouth with one hand, a soba escaping despite his discipline. Atlas whimpered softly, his head resting on the bench where Lily had been seated. Judge Porter sat back slowly, her fingers interlaced, her hazel eyes swept across the courtroom, at Travis, at Lily, at Brooke. Brooke's carefully constructed mask cracked, her lips curled, her shoulders stiffened. She half rose from her chair, anger bursting forth. She's lying, just like her mother, always pretending to be so saintly. The judge's gavel struck once, sharply. Miss Larkin, sit down. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Brooke froze, then slumped back into her seat, trembling with fury. Judge Porter spoke, her voice clear. The testimony, photographs, and corroboration from Mrs. Whitaker are sufficient. Effective immediately, Brooke Lynn is suspended from custody and visitation. Temporary custody is granted to Travis Morgan. The children will remain with their father. The words struck like thunder through the chamber. Brooke's face twisted, her painted smile gone. She muttered curses. Under her breath, eyes narrowing like blades. Alan Pierce leaned close, whispering desperately, but she shook, teed him off, rising again with clenched fists. Do you think you can take everything from me? She hissed. This isn't over. The gavel slammed again. Order. One more word and I will have you removed. Brooke's chest heaved, but she dropped back into her chair. Travis reached for Lily as she returned from the stand, her small hand slipping into his. He pulled her close, his other arm cradling Caleb. Atlas pressed against, their legs a living shield. Tears burned Travis's eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. For the first time in months, he felt the weight lift, even if only slightly. His children were safe, at least for now. The first real snow of winter blanketed Summit Springs in a white hush. The streets muffled under inches of powder. School had just let out, children's voices carrying across the frozen air as they rushed into waiting cars. Lily Morgan, wrapped in a navy coat that seemed too big for her thin frame, stepped carefully down the icy steps, clutching her worn backpack. Her brown hair poked out from beneath a wool hat, cheeks flushed from the cold. Atlas was waiting near the corner, sitting tall beside Travis, who leaned against his truck. Travis had come straight from a short errand, his heavy boots leaving deep imprints in the snow. His Saunders' gaze never strayed, far from his daughter. He had insisted on picking her up personally since the court ruling, not trusting Brooke's desperation to stay contained. But danger always seemed to lurk when least expected. From across the street, a sleek silver SUV rolled up slowly, its tinted window lowering just enough to reveal Brooke Larkin. Her perfect blonde curls framed her face like a cruel halo, though dressed in an elegant fur-trimmed coat. Her blue eyes burned with restless fury. She leaned across the passenger seat and called, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. Lily? Honey, come here. Get in the car. Mommy wants to take you home. Lily froze mid-step, her boots crunching in the snow. Her wide eyes darted between the SUV and her father in the distance. Confusion clouded her young face, quickly replaced by terror as she recognized the familiar menace in Brooke's tone. "Get in," Brooke snapped, voice breaking. She flung open the passenger door, leaned over, and grabbed at Lily's arm. Her manicured nails dug through the sleeve of the girl's coat as she yanked. "Please, no!" Lily screamed, trying to pull back, but Brooke's grip tightened. At that moment, Atlas's ears shot up. The German Shepherd leapt forward, his powerful body breaking into a sprint, snow spraying beneath his paws. His deep bark thundered through the schoolyard like a warning shot. Children turned, startled, but Travis recognized the signal instantly. He bolted after Atlas, his breath steaming in the icy air. "Lily," he roared, his voice carrying like a rifle crack. From the opposite end of the street, a sheriff's cruiser slid to a halt. Sheriff Daniel Dalton, a shouldered man in his late 42nd, with weathered skin and a trim mustache, streeted out. Known in Summit Springs for his firm but fair approach, Dalton had been a steady friend to Travis since his return from deployment. He wore a heavy brown jacket over his uniform, a Stetson, pulled low against the snow, and his dark eyes narrowed the moment he spotted Brooke. "Brooke, Larkin," he barked, "step away from the child." But Brooke's desperation had snapped past reason. She yanked harder, trying to shove Lily into the seat. Lily sobbed, her small hands clawing at the edge of the door frame, refusing to let go. Atlas was there. First. With a growl that vibrated like thunder, he lunged in front of the SUV, his teeth bared, body stiff and unyielding. He stood between the vehicle and freedom, amber eyes locked on Brooke with primal defiance. His bark split the cold air, each note sharp and commanding. "Get that mud away!" Brooke shrieked, panicked, slamming her hand against the steering wheel. But Travis had already reached them. He tore open the driver's door, his tall frame, towering, steel gray eyes blazing. "Let her go, Brooke." His voice was yet filled with iron. Brooke's painted smile returned in a grotesque twist. "She's mine too. You can't just erase me from their lives." Lily's voice cut through the snow, small and broken. "Daddy, help." That was enough. Travis pulled Lily free with a single motion, gathering her trembling body into his arms. She clung to his chest, sobbing, her tears soaking through his coat. Atlas shifted instantly to stand between them, and Brooke's outstretched arms, a wall of muscle and fur, teeth flashing when she tried to move closer. Sheriff Dalton stormed up, his boots crunching on ice. His weathered face was carved with authority, eyes burning with controlled anger. "Miss Larkin, you are under arrest for violating a protective order and attempted abduction of a minor." "You can't do this!" Brooke screamed, her voice breaking into a shrill pitch. Her once perfect composure unraveled as Dalton snapped handcuffs over her wrists. She thrashed, spitting curses into the frigid air. Dalton's tone was flat, immovable. "I can and I am. You'll answer to the judge for this." The other, children and parents, frozen in shock moments earlier, began to murmur, some pulling their kids close, others watching in disbelief as the scene unfolded. Brooke, once polished and poised, now looked wild, her blonde hair falling in messy strands, makeup smudged beneath furious tears. Travis held Lily, and tighter, his heart pounding with both rage and relief. Caleb, back at home with Mrs. Whitaker, flashed in his mind. What if Brooke had gotten both of them? The thought was unbearable. Atlas circled once, then returned to stand beside them, pressing his great head against Lily's arm. She sobbed harder, burying her face into the dog's fur, gripping his collar as though he were the only anchor left in the world. His steady presence calmed her trembling, her breathing slowing as warmth radiated through his thick coat. Travis bent down, his voice breaking. "You're safe, sweetheart. I promise you're safe now." Dalton gave Travis a firm nod as he loaded Brooke into the back of his non-cruiser. "She'll be booked tonight. The DA will add charges for child endangerment and abduction attempt. Keep the kids close, Travis, but you can breathe easier. This stunt will not play well in front of Judge Porter." Travis managed a tired smile. "Thank you, Dan. I owe you." The sheriff's eyes softened for war. "A moment. Number. You owe those kids. Just keep fighting for them." Snowflakes drifted lazily from the gray sky as the cruiser pulled away. Brooke's muffled screams fading into the distance. The schoolyard grew quiet again, save for the crunch of Travis's boots as he carried Lily back toward the truck. Atlas trotted faithfully at his side, tail raised, eyes still scanning every shadow. Lily's arm stayed locked around her father's neck, her tears soaking into the wool of his coat. When they reached the truck, she slid down just enough to throw her arms around Atlas, burying her face into his fur. "Thank you," she whispered through sobs. "You saved me." The dog licked her cheek once, a gentle reassurance before settling on the snow with Lily pressed against him. Travis stood over them, his breath heavy, eyes stinging. In that moment, father, daughter, and dog formed a single silhouette against the falling snow, proof that no matter how ruthless the storm, love and loyalty would always rise to defend the innocent. The weeks following Brooke's arrest were like the slow thaw after a brutal storm. The Morgan home, once heavy with silence and fear, began to breathe again. Snow still covered the roofs of Summit Springs, but inside the modest farmhouse, warmth slowly returned, not just from the crackle of the fireplace, but from the fragile hope rebuilding in each heart. Travis Morgan had made his choice. He would not return to extended overseas deployments. The Army had offered another tour, but he declined with quiet finality. Instead, he applied for a position with the Summit County Search and Rescue Unit. It was a job suited to his skills, a blend of discipline, courage, and compassion. But most importantly, it kept him close to Lily and Caleb. His broad-shouldered frame, once hardened for foreign battlefields, now bent toward the softer war of fatherhood. Atlas adapted seamlessly to this new chapter. At 6 years old, the German Shepherd bore a commanding presence. 80 pounds of sinew, black and tan fur and amber eyes, bright with intelligence. Yet, beyond his physical power, there was something gentler now in his demeanor. He seemed to understand the children's wounds. When Lily woke in the night, whimpering from nightmares, Atlas would pad softly to her bedside, laying his head on the mattress until her trembling hand found his fur. Caleb, too, found comfort in the dog's presence. Often the baby would press his small palm against Atlas's ear, giggling until sleep carried him away. To guide Lily through the deeper scars, Travis reached out to Dr. Meredith Clean, a child psychologist in town. Meredith was, in her late 32nd, a petite woman with shoulder-length auburn hair and warm hazel eyes. She spoke softly, her voice like a lullaby meant for broken hearts. In her office, paintings of birds and shelves stacked with colored pencils, Lily was encouraged to draw her feelings. Some pages came out dark with jagged lines, others tender with soft pinks and yellows. Meredith taught Lily breathing exercises, small tools to quiet the storms inside. And Atlas was always welcome. He would lie near Lily's chair, tail sweeping slowly across the rug, watching with quiet loyalty. Meredith smiled more than once, remarking, "That dog may be as therapeutic as I am." It was Lily, however, who found a way to create light in their home again. One afternoon, while Travis repaired a loose shutter on the porch, Lily tugged at his sleeve. Her small face was serious, eyes intent. "Daddy," she said, "I want to make a garden for Mommy so she won't be forgotten." The words pierced Travis's chest, but he managed to smile. A garden for Grace. He knelt, his rough hand brushing her soft hair. "Let's do it." Behind the house stretched a patch of land where snow melted more quickly under the afternoon sun. There they began. Travis turned the soil with some strong arms, while Lily, bundled in her blue coat and mittens, pressed seeds carefully into the earth. Caleb toddled nearby, unsteady but determined, his tiny boots crunching the ground as he tried to mimic his father. Atlas kept close, ears flicking at every crow overhead, occasionally nudging Caleb away from the mud. It was Lily who brought out a small wooden plank. She had written in uneven letters with paint borrowed from Mrs. Whitaker, "Grace's garden." The words were crooked, some letters larger than others, but Travis felt his throat tighten when he saw it. He helped her hammer it into the ground, and together they stood silently, remembering the woman who had been wife, mother, and the soul of their home. Grace Morgan had been tall and slender, with gentle green eyes and chestnut, brown hair that fell in soft waves. She had loved cooking more than anything, her laugh filling the house with warmth. Travis remembered her humming while holding newborn Lily, her voice carrying through late evenings. The memory was sharp, bittersweet. But now, in the soil of Summit Springs, her legacy would grow again. Each evening, the ritual became the same. Dinner around the table, laughter returning in the cautious bursts. Then Travis would gather his children in the living room. Caleb sat on his lap, Lily curled at his side, Atlas stretched across the threshold like a silent sentinel. Travis read from book stories of heroes, fables of loyalty, sometimes Grace's old favorites. His deep voice filled the rooms, soothing, promising. Lily's shoulders no longer flinched when shadows moved in the hall. Caleb giggled. More often, his belly full and cheeks rosy. Atlas would lift his head at every creak, eyes sharp. But once convinced all was safe, he lowered it again, sighing as if to say, "Rest now, I'll keep watch, Mrs." Whitaker continued to Kara, be part of their lives, quieter now, but ever faithful. She baked cookies that filled the house with sweetness, tended Caleb with grandmotherly patience, and sometimes sat with Travis on the porch. Her silver hair glistened in the moonlight as she said softly, "You're building them a new childhood, Travis, one they deserve." He looked at his children playing in the yard, Atlas bounding after a snowball Lily had and thrown, Caleb clapping his little hands. For the first time in years, Travis felt something ease in his chest. Perhaps he could rebuild what war, grief, and betrayal had tried to take. One night, Lily slipped her hand into his as he tucked her in. Her brown eyes were wide but calm. "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see the garden?" Travis kissed her forehead gently. "Yes, sweetheart, I think she's smiling at it right now." Atlas lay across the doorway, ears twitching, a silent guardian beneath the glow of the nightlight. Caleb stirred in his crib, then fell back into peaceful sleep. Travis stood for a long time, listening to their breathing before retreating to his own room. For the first time since Grace's death, the house felt alive again, not haunted by shadows, but warmed by love, by healing, by the presence of a loyal dog and a father who refused to fail his children again. The courthouse in Denver was busier than usual that morning, the air thick with the hum of conversations, footsteps echoing against the marble floors. But in courtroom 3B, silence carried a different weight, the weight of final judgment. Travis Morgan stood near the plaintiff's table, his charcoal suit pressed clean, though no clothing could soften the rugged lines of his face. His short-cropped brown hair revealed streaks of gray at the temples, marks of war and worry that had aged him beyond his 37 years. His square jaw was tight, his lips set in a thin line, but his steel-gray eyes softened when he glanced at the two children sitting quietly in the front row with Mrs. Whitaker. Lily clutched her little brother's hand and kept the other wrapped around Atlas's thick fur. The German shepherd sat proudly, his amber eyes sweeping across the room, tail still as stone. Across from them sat Brooke Larkin, though the confident woman from months ago was almost unrecognizable. Her once flawless blonde curls had lost their shine, hastily tied back in a knot. Makeup meant to conceal exhaustion, instead emphasized the dark circles beneath her eyes. Dressed in a wrinkled beige suit, she looked diminished, though her blue eyes still glinted with resentment. At her side was her attorney, Alan Pierce, polished as ever in a dark navy suit, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his knowledge of a case already slipping away. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. "All rise." Judge Elaine Porter entered, her long black robe flowing around her tall frame. The streaks of gray in her hair caught the courtroom lights, but her hazel eyes remained sharp as ever, unwavering as they surveyed the parties. She adjusted her glasses and took her seat. "Be seated." The prosecution began with Avery Grant, Travis's attorney. His presence was steady, as it had been since the first petition. Today, he wore a dark gray suit, his sandy blonde hair neatly combed back, his trimmed beard catching the morning light. Avery's voice was even, confident, but not without feeling. "Your Honor," he began, "we present the final motion in the matter of custody and safety for the minors, Lily and Caleb Morgan. The court has already witnessed testimony, photographic evidence, and prior protective orders. Today, we bring forth the summation. Brooke Larkin is not only guilty of repeated emotional and physical abuse toward the children, but also engaged in a documented conspiracy to seize assets intended for them, assets left by their late mother, Grace Morgan. We ask the court to grant full, permanent custody to their father, Travis Morgan, and terminate all parental rights of the respondent, Alan." Pierce rose immediately, his voice smooth yet strained. "Your Honor, my client admits she struggled under the pressure of sudden guardianship, but she denies malice. She wishes for rehabilitation, not the eradication of her role. We request leniency." Judge Porter's eyes narrowed slightly. "We'll review the evidence once more." Avery laid out documents, the intercepted recordings of Brooke meeting with the man, Caleb, signatures prepared for fraudulent transfers, Mrs. Whitaker's detailed testimony, photographs of bruises, medical evaluations, and the report from the Department of Child Services. At that cue, Dana Morales, the family's assigned social worker, stepped forward. Dana was in her mid-32nd, with olive-toned skin and black hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a navy blazer, and her brown eyes carried the calm firmness of someone used to navigating broken families. Her voice was clear, professional. Since custody was transferred temporarily, the children have shown marked improvement. Lily, age 6, no longer displays persistent night terrors. She has bonded positively with both her father and their support animal, Atlas. Caleb, age 1, has gained weight appropriately, and his feeding issues have ceased. It is the professional recommendation of Child Services that full custody be granted to Travis Morgan. Brooke Larkin is not a safe guardian for these children. Brooke shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening, eyes wet with anger more than sorrow. When asked if she had anything to say, Brooke stood, her voice shook, but not with regret. He was never there. I raised them while he was gone. And now, because I made mistakes, you erase me? He'll fail them, just like he failed Grace. The judge rapped her gavel. Once. Miss Larkin, that's enough. Travis rose uninvited, but Judge Porter nodded for him to speak. He placed both hands on the table, his posture tall, but his voice calm. Your Honor, I have failed before. I left when my grief was too much. I buried myself in duty because I didn't know how to be both a soldier and a father. But I am here now. My children don't need perfection. They need protection, and I will give that every day I have left. The courtroom went still. Avery placed a quiet hand on his client's shoulder. Even Atlas seemed to lower his head, as though acknowledging the weight of the words. Judge Porter leaned back, fingers steepled. She took a long breath. This court finds the respondent, Brooke Larkin, guilty of child neglect, emotional abuse, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Custody and guardianship of Lily and Caleb Morgan are hereby permanently granted to their father, Travis Morgan. The respondent is denied all visitation rights until further notice. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder, final and irrevocable. Brookie slumped back, her face pale, lips curling into a silent snarl. Alan Pierce fumbled with his papers, his hands trembling as he shoved them into a worn leather briefcase. He never once dared to meet her eyes. Sheriff Dalton's boots echoed against the wooden floor as he stepped forward, a silent wall of authority, ready to end any last act of defiance. Across the room, Lily's small fingers dug into Atlas's fur as if anchoring herself to something unshakable. She turned toward her father. Travis lowered to one knee, gathering both children into his arms. His shoulders, once hardened by battlefields, quivered with quiet sobs. Yet when he lifted his face, his smile was steady, unbroken. For the first time, the war inside him felt finished. Outside, Summit Springs greeted them with a fragile winter sun breaking through the clouds. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, cameras flashing like tiny explosions. Avery shielded the family with her coat, guiding them swiftly toward the waiting truck. The courthouse doors shut behind them, sealing away years of lies and betrayals. That evening, the farmhouse breathed again. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried the sound of laughter. Travis had filed his papers for honorable discharge, closing one chapter, opening another. His uniform would remain in the closet, traded for flannel shirts and the rough, honest work of raising his children. And Atlas, faithful, unwavering, had found his new duty. Sheriff Dalton arrived at dusk, his voice gruff but kind as he ruffled the shepherd's fur. County's making it official. He's got the discipline and the heart. Atlas is joining our search and rescue team. Atlas's tail thumped hard against the floor, as though he understood every word. Dinner was simple pasta with tomato sauce from Grace's old jars in the cellar. Mrs. Whitaker laid out the dishes, Caleb giggled at the steam curling up from his bowl, and Lily, solemn and careful, grated cheese onto her father's plate. But it was after the meal, in the quiet glow of the fire, that the moment came. Lily nestled beside Atlas on the rug, burying her face into his thick fur. Her voice was a tremor, almost swallowed by the crackle of wood. Our home is safe now, isn't it? Travis rose from his chair, the weight of her words sinking deeper than any bullet wound ever had. Crossing the room, he knelt beside her, pressing a kiss to the crown of her hair. His voice broke as he whispered, "Safe, as long as we stand together." Atlas lowered his head onto Lily's lap, amber eyes watchful, yet soft, a silent oath only a soldier's comrade could make. And just as peace seemed to settle, a sudden sound shattered the night. Tires screeched on the gravel road outside, headlights cutting across the frosted window panes. Travis froze. Atlas lifted his head, ears rigid, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. The farmhouse, once brimming with calm, now held its breath. Because sometimes, even after battles are won, shadows return when least expected. Above Summit Springs, the first stars pierced through the dark, fragile promises against an uncertain horizon. And the lesson lingered. True miracles are not only found in endings that promise peace, but in the courage to rise again when peace is tested. So tonight, hold your loved ones closer. Because love, like Atlas's vow, is strongest when the night is darkest.